Sonic Rush was a fun game, but one that I felt never fully brought out the best of itself. It had an excellent foundation, a more twitch-based chain reaction take on classic 2D Sonic action, with an exhilarating boost mechanic, an addictive trick system, thrilling roller coaster type levels, and annoying sections, gimmicks, and bosses that had nothing to do with any of that. It had surprisingly charming moments in its dialogue, paired with the introduction of a great new character, but also had a lackluster world-ending story that hardly got any focus in the cutscenes, level themes, and routine structure of the game. Gameplay in its own premise felt misguided in direction at times, but with those particular qualities in isolation, and while being held together with a sleek, audiovisual presentation, Rush checks out as an enjoyable, memorable time, but one where you could see a more refined adventure being made out of it. And an adventure was precisely what Dimps crafted out of its follow-up to Sonic Rush in 2007, Sonic Rush Adventure. Another shot at a 2D boosting game starring Sonic and Blaze that manages to resolve a lot of those issues I mentioned earlier. Rush Adventure not only improves on the foundation brought by Sonic Rush, but also commits to crafting an appealing, swashbuckling journey around it, offering a sequel with better designed boost stages, the most minimum of expectations for a good follow-up, and other flourishes that make it stand out as its own self-contained journey. Novel minigames, exploration, collectibles, unlockables, and a more dedicated story with fun cutscenes and consistent dialogue. Granted, this sequel does have its own inherent issues with adding these more extrinsic things, but as you'll see, I have a lot of fondness for how they went for a more complete adventure this time around, compared to the disproportionate adventure that the first Rush game tried to tell. It not only improved where Sonic Rush went wrong, but also built an identity that the first game didn't commit to. Let's start with the easiest area to compare and contrast. Annoying gimmicks, layouts, and bosses from the first game are refined with more efficient ones in Rush Adventure. Sonic Rush's appeal was in escalating your character through tall, hazardous, and winding levels, maximizing and getting dangerous with the boost, plowing through enemies, rapidly tweaking stage obstacles, and masterfully cutting through parts of a level that would otherwise waste your time. There was a lot of room to do this in the first game, but also a lot of glaring sections that just didn't involve that grind. Uninspired, floating block platforming, auto-scrolling sections, ones that would randomly transition into 3D beat-em-ups, still can't get over that, actual beat-em-up sections locking you in one place, and on-rail sections that control like garbage. Rush Adventure cuts that crap and offers new stage gimmicks that facilitates the boost and trick performing gameplay more than ever, and at the very least provides dynamic sections that, while divergent, still vibe with the fast-paced dodging action of the core side-scrolling. No more beat-em-up sections or auto-scrolling bits, and while floating platforms do still linger here and there, they're kept in moderation and function as brief stepping stones towards the fast lanes ahead, as they should. Every island of this game has something fun and varied to play around with. Plant kingdoms, bouncy mushrooms, and possessed trees work as fun launchers for trick combos and getting some height advantages out of the layout. Machine Labyrinth also features these kinds of opportunities with its steam pipes and floating drums, but also hosts some unique roundabout layouts that push you in a lot of unexpected directions, even featuring this steam-powered glider that you can take advantage of in various speeds to breeze through the danger below and score power-ups from above. Haunted Ship has tons of slick vertical moments with these jumping bands and descending barrels that aid you in getting to said jumping bands. Sky Babylon features tons of perspective and floating trickery while still keeping a good flow state. It's also noteworthy for being tailored for a particular character. Playing as Sonic forces you to deal with the flames that litter the area, while playing as Blaze lets you bypass those flames due to her inherent powers. It's a nice character-based touch. Even up to the last world, Pirates Island, you're encountering a lot of obstacles that explore trick opportunities and quick decision making. It even has the fastest, cutest dolphins in all of Sonic that you can ride underwater water and swim through hoops to gain boost energy. They really nail the gimmicks here, if that wasn't evidence enough. There are still a number of bottomless pits and spike traps in Rush Adventure, but they're not as frequent to come across from my experience unless you're stupidly daring enough to look for them. A lot of the time you're being launched in the air or contained in the level's racetrack. Boosting, stunt performing, finding shortcuts through loops and tall areas, getting a perspective change while things are still fast and twitchy, and it all feels great, with little quality of life improvements, like adding a bit more of a hop to Sonic's upper aerial trick, getting star visual markers that show how much is added to the tension gauge when performing and completing tricks, rail grinding tricks being mapped to the B button for easy access, and a new power-up that allows you to do faster tricks in the air, so hype AF moments like this can occur. There are also additional hidden island levels that do feature some trademark bullshit bottomless pits and layouts, and I find it hilarious that even the characters acknowledge one of them as an in-universe hotspot in dialogue. But I can forgive their existence. They aren't part of the main levels you unlock, and as a result can get pretty crazy with their executions. They usually chalk into about a minute, so they're pretty nifty, isolated challenges to stumble across. There's not much new I can analyze here without me just gushing about stage gimmicks for 30 minutes. Rush Adventure's levels are just consistently fun and varied in a way that its predecessor couldn't be, without some red flags hindering the formula. Now that said formula has room to breathe in these levels, I can properly reflect on how Dimps really did attempt to take Sonic gameplay to a much more technical and frenetic level than anything before it. I made it a point in my retrospective on the first game that it was an evolution of the gameplay philosophy found in the classic Genesis trilogy, making it hard to compare fairly. Those games were about naturally swerving through levels and planning speed accordingly, and there was no way that a momentum-driven, pinball avatar like Sonic in those games could survive these steep layouts and obstacles found in Rush. The boost may be akin to Sonic's spin dash ability from the Genesis games, but it has a lot of advanced properties behind it, being offensive, meter-based, and providing instant acceleration on the run all in one move. A fundamental contrast to the reliable stop and rev motions of the spin dash. It was an entirely different mode of play than the Genesis titles that wasn't always about making the game automate itself faster, but about keeping your avatar active and risky, all for the sake of shaving some seconds, reaching trick opportunities more, and getting a sick rank by the end of it all. These 2D games introduced and made mainstay a more risky, off-the-rails style of play for Sonic. And the tension gauge happens to be my favorite unique iteration of the boost. It has that dangerous, combo-heavy, boundary-breaking appeal. Something that I thought I'd send off to right here and now, since this will be the last time it gets properly implemented. Or at least not until it gets retooled into something more conventional in a later form. Rush Adventure has better designed boosting levels, but another area that it surprisingly improves on from the first game are boss fights, which in Sonic Rush had distinctive 2.5D setups but were ultimately ruined by some heinous execution. You couldn't attack bosses right away, their patterns would take excruciatingly long to expose their given weakness, and you had to go through those motions for an arduous amount of hits. Rush Adventure's boss fights, on the other hand, have so much more activity and scope to work with here. Instead of a set amount of hits, bosses now have health bars where you're given a lot of freedom in how often you can attack a boss. What's also great is that their weaknesses aren't always hidden by drawn-out attack patterns. Machine Labyrinth's boss has you fending off against colored wrecking balls of different weights. You have to build up enough swinging momentum to land a hit at the top. Juggling multiple attacks at once is very satisfying and possible here. Blizzard Peaks may have a boss where you have to wait 3 different phases to hit its weakness, but even then you're dealing with unique platforming layouts inside of its innards to race to the core every time, so there's always something interesting and challenging to work with. These bosses even take advantage of the dual screen setup by having action take place on both screens, which not only signals cues for incoming attacks, but also creates some fun transitions to different phases. My favorite boss is probably Sky Babylon's, where you have to hit an enemy within an on-rail running section below that will launch you to the top to reach the boss. Hitting its weak spot means risking falling below and repeating the pattern, but knowing that you can perform aerial tricks with the R button after hitting the boss each time makes it fun to see how long you can stay above and get damage in. With these fun levels and boss fights in mind, it really does feel like Dimps assessed everything that was obtrusive about the gameplay of the first Sonic Rush and strived to make improvements. But something aesthetically that might catch players of the first game off guard when getting into Rush Adventure is the different level of presentation quality here. Don't get me wrong, the game as a whole with its lively 3D models, maritime themed menus, and colorful high-bit 2D environments do look great. But I can't help but feel that the first Rush game had a more lush and consistent level of detail, whereas the levels of Rush Adventure have a lot more simple, predictable patterns and noticeably compressed backgrounds. More noticeable, however, is the change in soundtrack direction. Sonic Rush's most undeniable point of quality was its distinct funky soundtrack by Hideki Naganuma, offering the series with both the freshest beats it's ever had and some of the wackiest samples you'll ever find in a Sonic game. Naganuma unfortunately doesn't return for Rush Adventure. Apparently, it was because he was on the Yakuza team at the time. But what we do get is a super solid soundtrack, composed by Seiro Okamoto, Mariko Namba, and series veteran Tomoya Otani. Not anywhere near the funk of the first game, but there are some boppin' swashbuckling themes here. And I do respect how this soundtrack tries to emulate the spirit of Sonic Rush with silly vocal samples here and there.
When I start, there is no stopping. The beat kicks, then I start rocking. Beat kicks, the beat kicks, rocking. Beat kicks, beat, I start rocking. Beat kicks, beat, I start rocking. Beat kicks, beat, I start rocking. Beat kicks, beat, kicks, rocking.
We can pinpoint a lot of these changes in production as a result of Rush Adventure's radical differences in structure and story from the first game. Appropriate considering that the first game was a step above the storytelling of Dimps' Sonic Advance series on GBA, but ultimately had its own set of issues. Cutscene execution was pretty stiff. Text boxes were too small to let the characters elaborate on anything properly, you could only move on to the next dialogue box once the portraits slide in and out of the screen, and there was no way to skip any of it on the first playthrough. Rush Adventure improves on all of these fronts. Characters now have a larger box to work with and can have actual fluid conversations with one another. You can move on to dialogue with the A button faster since every portrait is typically present on screen, and the game lets you skip any of these cutscenes on the first playthrough. So whether you're into the story or want to skip all of it, you're being accounted for on both ends. Great accessibility. But I'd say this is a charming little story worth sitting through. Sonic and Tails find a strange reading in the middle of a thunderstorm and get transported to an oceanic world populated by islands. They get shipwrecked on a place called Windmill Village and get welcomed by Marine the Raccoon, a rambunctious girl who could never build a means to escape her island. But with Sonic's speed and Tails' engineering skills, they're able to build a water bike of their own, and set out to explore whatever islands are out of reach, collecting whatever materials they find along the way, and building newer, bigger crafts to take their ventures even farther. Blaze in the actual conflict of the game, these robot pirates, led by the big bad Captain Whisker and his accomplice Johnny, don't show themselves until you've reached the third island, in which Sonic and Tails discover that they themselves have landed in Blaze's dimension, which was always going to be a great concept for a sequel to Rush, where that original game was about Blaze landing in Sonic's world and chaos ensuing from her arrival. The problem with that game's story, though, was that we never got a good grasp of what exactly Sonic's world was like, and what was at stake. It was just this stark collection of level themes with little cohesion. The only thing really tying them together was a wavy effect on the world map that showed how much danger they're in, And that was about it. Even the characters and dialogue were pretty half-hearted about the game's central conflict. But in Rush Adventure, we have a lot of moments to explore and discuss the specifics of Blaze's soul dimension and Sonic & Company's overall objectives. Knowing Blaze's formal demeanor and her role as the princess of the soul dimension, you'd think that worlds within that dimension would have more regal themes when compared to the dinosaur jungles, haunted ships, and Viking mountains you get in this game. But I'd say it's a pretty inspired choice, thinking back on it. Blaze was a character tied to tradition and heritage, and a lot of Rush Adventure is about uncovering lost islands and saving a family heirloom in the long run, namely Blaze's jeweled scepter that controls the balance between dimensions. Though because of how focused the game is on tourism and the thrill of building up the journey, this is a very straightforward plot, with the characters all filling their roles to a T. Sonic and Blaze are the agents of action, Tails is there to build their vehicular means of exploration, and Marine is there for comedic relief and to give some excuse for agency. The robot pirate villains are always one step ahead but act pretty silly, and it's clear that the two Eggmen are once again behind the scenes of this catastrophe. But the gang does their thing, they do protocols, they have some laughs, and save the day by the end. This is mostly what cutscenes amount to. And that may seem like a downgrade when compared to the emotional moments that the first Rush game did sparingly well, but it's good to see in Rush Adventure that everyone has their work cut out for them. They actually care about their mission, unlike the first Rush game where characters were more inclined to be chill and spout morals than to address the time-space continuum disaster in front of them. I think it especially works well for Blaze here because she already finished her character arc at the end of Sonic Rush, going from a cold-hearted, reclusive guardian to a more open-hearted hero of her own. So it's nice to see her more in her element in Rush Adventure, where she's both active on the case about the stolen jeweled scepter, but is also willing to slow herself down and do it with the help of Sonic and his tropical carpooling gang. There's even one moment before the last world where Blaze gets fed up with Marine's childish attitude and calls her out for being a nuisance, showing that she still has some high-strung temper from the first game that hasn't been fully ironed out. But at least in this context, you can surmise that she's only like this not out of brutal obligation, but for the sake of someone's own safety, especially a kid who doesn't know any better like Marine. But speaking of Marine, I can't really call her out for being the most annoying character ever, like the zeitgeist would expect me to declare, since any obnoxious moments from her are only really expressed in text and less in audio. But all I can really say about her is that she's harmless at best and kind of disappointing as a new character at worst. She's someone who wants to create her own adventures, and now that actual adventurers like Sonic, Tails, and Blaze come into her life, she gets those opportunities for herself. A lighthearted way to motivate exploring new worlds with Sonic the Hedgehog. The one aspect I really like about her is that you meet these members of the Coconut Crew across islands that all have some personal connection with Marine, and they all hang out and offer you missions in Windmill Village. So I like this idea of her being the unexpected social core of the gang, the one that helps the team get around and build the community. But in practice, it doesn't really go anywhere that deep. Characters just make fun of her for being naive, and she continues being conceited about these moments being her adventure rather than being collateral to Sonic and Blaze's objectives. And I can't help but feel pretty disappointed by that. One of the great things about Blaze as a new Sonic character, besides being playable and her sharing similar personality traits with me, was that her arc involved being independent and thoroughly disinterested in Sonic's value as a hero, but then warms up to his kind-hearted attitude by the end and becomes inspired to be as legendarily cool as he usually is. Meanwhile, Marine just piggybacks off of Sonic's efforts, takes all the credits like a spoiled brat, and does all of it to the annoyance of Sonic and everyone. It is kind of endearing how often she gets all up in the grill of the main villains, and even gets a cheeky shot at the final boss at one point. And she does eventually work for her own independence and respect for Sonic later. But it only feels earned not because of any kind of heartwarming arc, but because the gang has scolded her enough for her to get with the program. If Blaze was a character that learned a lot from Sonic, then Marine is a character that still has a lot to learn from Sonic. Overall, how much you like the story will depend on how much you put stock into things like fun characters bouncing off of one another and their reactions to the levels and events you unlock. It's all very fluffy stuff, but I myself find a lot of charm in those things. I like reading about everyone's company in this game, and I like the number of in-game dynamic cutscenes compared to the first. I like for once that we get a Sonic handheld game where, like the console entries, cutscenes inform gameplay and vice versa. But the bigger half of Rush Adventure is the exploration. To unlock new levels, you have to plot a course on a sea map towards it with a given vessel, where you're tasked with playing a little minigame to get to the goal. You start off with the Wave Cyclone, where you glide across the ocean, leap across ramps, and dodge enemies, but as you beat levels and gain materials, you can build larger vessels that help you go longer distances and overcome certain environmental obstacles within the map. The Ocean Tornado is a ship with the longest range, where you're firing ammunition at enemy ships. The Baja Aqua Blast is a hovercraft that can overcome icy and rocky areas, and is similar to the Water Bike, where you're dashing in a straight line, blasting at enemies. And lastly, the Deep Typhoon is a submarine that can go through rough waters, where you're firing at enemies that pop up in front of you. The unlocking and traveling parts are pretty satisfying and help build up anticipation for the boost levels. Getting the best rank in boost stages gives you more of that island's trademark material. To get enough to build new things means replaying levels, which means more room for experimenting with alternate routes, different tactics, or characters. Something I was always willing to do with a skill-based action platformer like Sonic, but here there's a good resource system put behind it. But what I want to highlight about this particular facet of Rush Adventure is something that would remain prominent with Sonic games involving boost gameplay from this point on. Boost levels always being segmented or contrasted with some other gameplay style. Nothing new for the series in terms of main games, but I do find it interesting that Rush Adventure started the trend of rewarding boost levels after participating in some other diversion. Now, whether the boost gameplay can or cannot hold up an entire game of its own, and how these secondary gameplay styles put that into question, is something I personally cannot determine by principle. I can only evaluate what's given to me per product. All boost levels or sometimes boost levels. Sonic Rush was all boost levels, but even that game had bad moments in the core gameplay, and such dissonant cutscenes that it didn't even matter. The product itself, even without some secondary style, was still pretty disjointed. But what I can say for Rush Adventure at least, is that segmenting boost levels with vessel traveling, more worthwhile cutscenes, and material collecting fits with the adventurous, oceanic theme of the game, and it really does feel refreshing to get on foot with a new vibrant level after being in the water for some time, and having that level in your menu ready for replays and thus material grinding. However, what I also think is at stake here is whether the secondary gameplay style has intrinsic value of its own, one that doesn't have to surpass the boost gameplay, but has to leave some room for interest and mastery, and thus a good impression when alternating between styles, which is one of the lower points of Rush Adventure, I'll admit. The vessels are functional, but pretty skin deep in gameplay. There's no real point to getting good at these minigames or even go for high scores, because it's about the destination and not the journey here. Players aren't gonna really care about technical things like how you can quick select ammunition types on the Ocean Tornado with the D-pad, or how the Deep Typhoon is a legit rhythm game section, where you have to time your missiles to the beat of the background song. Because there are no obligations, challenges, or any good reason to make use of these techniques. All of these stages are a means to an end. I mean, you can hear the disappointment in my voice that I can't even go into a cartoon rhythm game analysis when this game could have easily capitalized on it, right? No matter where you are in the sea chart or how you approach an island, the patterns given to you are randomly generated anyway. So there's never really a sense of dangerous regions or specific enemies in certain spots. What you see is what you get, and what you get is pretty unremarkable. With that said, I do think the game could have expanded upon their gameplay value more by learning from what they did with the water bike here, because obtaining Chaos Emeralds in this game requires you to search for Johnny hidden somewhere in the sea chart, and challenge him to a race on the water bike to the finish. These races have been pretty infamous for their difficulty, but I only think that's because nothing in this game truly encourages you to learn more about the vehicles besides these sections. Aside from just upgrading your water bike for a total of 2 times through the black material you obtain from Pirates Island, these races are where the boost mechanic of the water bike actually comes in handy. You can boost with the water bike and collect rings to build more boost, but similar to the tension gauge in main gameplay, when you fill up the meter, you can boost for an overdriven amount of time, as long as you keep the action going. This is a neat way of tying the main gameplay with the secondary gameplay, sharing mechanics and giving you a good reason to master the water bike's controls. It's just that none of the other vehicles have this level of potency. You don't need to race anyone important with any of them, and they don't even have the boosting mechanic of the water bike. I think making that alone inclusive to every vehicle would go great lengths to make these vessel segments more compatible with the main boost gameplay. But as it stands, the exploration and unlocking of the vessels are real treats for me, but the gameplay of the vessels themselves are underwhelming diversions at worst, which also speaks to the game's copious amounts of unlockable missions. Like 100 of these are programmed in the game. You obtain these by talking with the inhabitants of Southern Island to unlock bonus collectibles, music for the sound test, cutscenes for the journal, and accessories gifted by these koalas to visually decorate your island. Pretty neat unlockables to get in your game cartridge, probably more valuable than obtaining game music and cutscenes from centralized internet platforms in 2007. And having a decked out and lively island with dinosaurs, flowers, and your own goddamn Sonic mantle on a volcano are pretty cute to see. But the missions themselves have you repeating levels you've already done. The most interesting ones involve collecting medals in particular areas, which is a nice little challenge about taking the right path, and the Soul Emerald missions involving tougher challenges with Blaze. But some more inventive, original missions, kinda like the zaniness you find in the Hidden Islands, would have made the act of doing 100 of these more palatable. Instead, we just get a lot of filler that requires a lot of patience to easily unlock one by one. What a paradox. As I've shown, Rush Adventure is far from a perfect adventure structure, most of its low points being relative to stuff that is just too easy or unremarkable. But despite all of that, there are some pretty cool moments that could have only been possible through this adventure setup. Unlocking main islands and hidden islands and Johnny are fun, but so are moments like going through an unassuming hidden island only to find one of the game's main levels resurfacing after its completion, or reaching Blizzard Peaks after crafting a hovercraft to get over the ice floes at the north, and getting to use snowboards that Tails brought along for some cool downhill gameplay. There's just a lot of fun cause and effect in this game, seeing the world expand, seeing your inventory and personal hub grow with more characters and compartments, chill hub world music that grows with intensity as the mission gets more serious. These are all welcome and ambitious things for a game that otherwise would have just been a bunch of really good fast side-scrolling levels. And the fact that they nailed the latter is great. Fixing the base of what Sonic Rush showed potential in should have been and was the priority here. So anything else they wanted to do to embellish any engagement with the world and theming of this particular entry are just victory laps at this point. They crafted some of the best 2D boosting levels I've ever played and had a go at a novel exploration system across the seas that for the most part works just fine. It's a real treat to go through these romantic storybook worlds with pirates, dinosaurs, haunted spirits, and ancient civilizations as Sonic or Blaze. It's nice to see them work as a team and get recreational. It's just a really pleasant game for me. May not be the perfect adventure, I have to keep prefacing that, but seeing a Rush game commit to any adventure of sorts is definitely remarkable. Sonic Rush Adventure was also notable for being the last original Sonic game by Dimps, before they would be commissioned to work under Sonic Team's existing entries, developing the Wii version of Sonic Unleashed, being tasked to make the fourth entry of the classic Genesis trilogy, the DS version of Sonic Colors, the 3DS version of Sonic Generations, and ending off their track record with the 3DS version of Sonic Lost World. Let's not make this sound too demeaning though. The fact that Sonic Team for a while let these original handheld Sonic games coexist along their mainline games, often as a clutch to the franchise's public reception, speaks to the amount of trust they had in Dimps as a Sonic developer. These later alternate versions even still kept in Dimps' talent in incorporating mechanics and story ideas that even Sonic Team would miss out on. But it is kind of unfortunate that the legacy of Dimps ended up sinking into the legacy of Sonic Team, when in more ideal circumstances they should have existed independently. Dimps may have been limited limited by the screen space and affordances of handhelds of the time, and they may get memed on for spikes and pits, but their initiatives for Sonic were always something that I deeply respected. To provide Sonic action as remarkable as the console versions on the go, and to reinvent the character with more exciting gameplay mechanics and involvement with the cast and story structures. Imagine a reality where Rush Adventure wasn't their last original hurrah, but a stepping stone towards not just great platforming levels, but ones with more new characters, involved cutscenes, hub worlds, missions, and exploration. But Rush Adventure is still a really great game. It has its ups and downs, but what adventure with Sonic isn't filled with ambitious highs with great gameplay, and more experimental but fascinating mid to low points? Those words alone are what make me love the series. As long as the adventure is committed to and has something complete to offer, I'm all for whatever ride Sonic is in, and it's titles like this from the past that make me believe there's still plenty of room for Sonic to offer those types of adventurous rides in the future. Thank you for watching this stylish retrospective, and for watching up to the end of this retrospective. As a reward, you'll get to hear this incoming announcement. These videos on the Rush games were originally supposed to kickstart a series of retrospectives where I analyze the modern Sonic Boost formula, but I've decided to put that concept on hold for now and focus more on Dimps' previous handheld Sonic projects next time. Apologies to those who were expecting my takes on the 3D Boost games after Rush Adventure, but doing this episode gave me a lot of respect and perspective on Dimps, and I honestly feel that my time is better spent looking back on their original achievements with Sonic than by formulating opinions on popular Sonic games that pretty much everyone has already formulated opinions on. Maybe someday, but not for now. Until then, see you soon.